It is not a crime to party with Mr. Epstein. Those were the words of Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, President Donald Trump's lawyer, and Lady Victoria Hervey, Prince Andrew's ex-girlfriend, said on national radio that not only is it not a crime to party with Epstein, but if you didn't party with him, you were a loser. So let me get this straight. First they said the files didn't exist. Then they said, okay, fine, there are files, but I'm not in them. Then it was, all right, I'm in them, but I didn't know about the other stuff. And now, if you're not in the files, you're kind of a loser. In the words of Adam Weishaupt, "O mortal man, is there anything you cannot be made to believe?" But this video isn't about the Epstein files. Everybody's making that video. Everybody's pointing at the names and the flights and the emails. This video is about what the Epstein files reveal about your mind. Not their mind, your mind. The first video I ever made on this channel was called "They're Laughing at You." I talked about the rigged system, the club you're not invited to, the table you'll never sit at. And if they were laughing back then, they're rolling on the floor right now, because it turns out some of those exclusive parties were Jeffrey Epstein's parties. More and more files have been released. And guess what? Nothing has happened. They got caught. And they're still laughing. At least in Europe, some people actually lost their jobs over this. There have been a few resignations and criminal investigations. But here in America, it's not a crime to party. The problem is, the machine can't investigate itself when the machine is in the files. Now again, in that first video, I told you about the table you'll never sit at, about the exclusive rooms and the parties you will never be invited to. But what if you were invited? As a matter of fact, let's go back in time. A billionaire like Epstein invites you to dinner. You don't know anything about what he's done. All you hear is that this billionaire with a lot of money and a lot of power wants you to party with him. And guess who else is going to be there? All these power brokers, the biggest names in the world. A friend tells you, yo, there's a big party in New York. You're going to break bread with some of the biggest names. This could be a huge opportunity for you. Be honest with yourself. Do you think you would have had the ability to deny that invitation? Because hindsight is always 20/20. Of course, now we look back and say, oh yeah, I would never. But if you were in that position before you knew anything Epstein had done, would you have been able to say no? That's the important question. See, this isn't about exposing the files. That's already been done. This isn't about focusing on the bad they're doing. That's already been done, and they're still laughing at us. The point is to figure out how we avoid falling into a situation like this, because we've seen the list of people that have been there and were involved. And yes, many of them were weirdos that wanted to do illegal things, but not all of them. Some may have had other motives. At the end of the day, it all comes back to more power. We've talked about this on the channel before, Nietzsche's will to power. Humans have that innate nature to seek more power. And most people believe that the path to power runs through rooms like Epstein's. They think power is money, connections, and access, being in the room where the deals happen. So when someone opens that door for you, your whole world view tells you to walk through it. Turning that down wouldn't just be hard. It would feel like turning down everything you've been taught to chase. But some people did turn it down. And this is the part nobody's talking about. Because the narrative has been that everybody who was invited wanted to go. That the only people who didn't show up were the people who weren't important enough. Remember what Hervey said. If you weren't at Epstein's parties, you were a loser. They want you to believe there was no way to say no. That being there was proof you mattered, but the files prove otherwise. There were people Epstein desperately wanted to meet. People he chased, people he was obsessed with, who told him no, which means two things. One, being in those files doesn't mean you were important. And two, there was always a way to say no. The people who went made a choice, and other people, in the exact same position, with the exact same invitation, chose differently. So what was different about the people who didn't accept the invitation? Now, before I tell you about one of those people, let me be clear. You can like him, you can hate him, you may not even know him. This has nothing to do with his personality or his politics or whether you agree with anything he's ever said. This is about the framework he used to make a decision. The fact that this man had the wherewithal to deny an invitation that some of the most powerful people on earth couldn't resist, that has to be commendable, regardless of anything else, because it tells us something about what it actually takes to say no. So one of the primary people Epstein wanted to meet was Nassim Taleb. He read all his books, had them on his reading list when he was in prison. He seemed to be infatuated with Taleb. The files revealed that Epstein asked numerous times to meet Taleb, and there is also proof in the files Epstein emailing someone saying he never met Taleb because Taleb denied every time. When they asked, Taleb said, "I told them to tell him to F off." Nobody's putting enough light on the people that denied because it shows a flaw in the whole argument. The people who went weren't just making bad decisions. They were making decisions that other people in the exact same position chose differently. So how was someone like Taleb able to avoid this? He reasoned his way through it. His friend said Epstein was a mathematical options trader, but Taleb was an options trader. So he checked. There was no trace of Epstein in the markets, no footprint at all, so he knew there was a scam. He didn't feel his way through the decision. He checked the math, and that's why rational thinking matters. Not only that, but he was also independent. He didn't want or need anything from Epstein. He didn't need the connections or the acceptance or need to sit at the big table. That's what made him different. He was autonomous. Now compare that to all the other people we've read about in the files. The ones in the files are out there screaming the loudest, saying they're disgusted, saying they want justice, saying they'll fund investigations, and their followers eat it up. Nobody stops to ask the obvious question. If you were so disgusted, why were you trying to get invited? Why were you emailing his people? Why were you at the house? They don't ask. They can't ask because the hero story already landed. And once a story lands in the mythos mind, facts can't dislodge it. The guy who literally wrote the book on how elites manipulate the public was in the files helping a predator manage his image. The populist who tells his followers to question everything, he was in a predator's mansion calling him a genius. The health expert who wrote about missing his infant son's medical emergency for important work. Well, come to find out, the important work was Epstein. These are the people society calls brilliant, and none of them checked the math. None of them were autonomous. None of them could say no. Being smart doesn't mean you're a rational thinker. That's the key. Intelligence and reason are not the same thing. You can have a genius level IQ and still run on stories. You can be the smartest person in the room, according to some, like they thought Epstein was, but in reality, he was a fraud, as Taleb proved. You can't think clearly when your identity depends on not thinking clearly. This is what Mike Hockney writes about in his book, Hyperhumanity. Basically, humanity is split between two kinds of thinkers, mythos and logos. The majority of people are mythos thinkers. They process the world through feeling, story, and tribe. And even people who think they're rational are still running mythos software. They just dress it up in credentials. So what does mythos thinking look like in real life? You grow up believing stories, religion from books, narratives passed down for generations. No facts, no evidence, just stories. And the crazy thing is, it works. Better than facts ever could. Researchers at Wharton tested this. They gave people 3 versions of a charity plea. The first group got facts, data about millions of starving children in Africa. The second group got a story, just one girl. Her name was Rokia. Here's her life. Here's what she's going through. The third group got both, Rokia's story, plus the data. You know which group gave the most money? Just the story, Rokia by herself. But you want to know what's crazy? Adding the facts to the story actually made people give less, not more. The data triggered the analytical brain, and the analytical brain cooled the emotional impulse to help. Facts didn't just fail to help, they made the story worse. That's the mythos mind. That's how it works. Stories move people, facts slow them down. We've been wired this way for thousands and thousands of years around the fire, and the masters know it. That's what they feed the slaves, and they eat it up. All your beliefs come from stories, media, religion. Your whole belief system is built on stories, not on rational thinking, not on math, not on analyzing the facts to reach a conclusion. We don't want facts. We want stories. And that's never been more obvious than right now. And that's exactly how the Epstein situation plays out. Someone tells a great story about how disgusted they were, and the facts come out. And the facts say otherwise. But by the time you see the facts, you already believe the story. That's how it works. That's always been how it works. And if you're watching this right now and your first instinct is to defend somebody in those files, whoever your guy is, that's not you thinking. That's the story doing its job. A logos thinker doesn't have a guy. A logos thinker has reason, and reason doesn't pick teams. George Orwell had a name for what I just described. He called it doublethink, the idea that people can believe two completely opposite things at the same time and never question either one. It's one of the core ideas in his book, 1984, and he thought it would take a totalitarian government to make it happen. But it's happening right now. Look at it. The same people that were at Epstein's events now position themselves as heroes fighting against Epstein. Those two things should short circuit in anyone's brain, but they don't, because the story is stronger than the contradiction. And that's the thing about 1984 that everybody gets wrong. We all read that book and think it's a warning about what a government could do to us. Big Brother watches you. The Ministry of Truth rewrites history. The thought police punish anyone who thinks for themselves. The scary part is supposed to be, what if someone builds this system and forces it on us? But look around. Nobody is forcing anyone to believe two contradictory things right now. There's no Ministry of Truth or thought police. The files are public. The emails are public. The contradictions are sitting right there in the open. And people with full access to that information choose the story over the facts every single time. Here's what Orwell didn't anticipate. And this might genuinely change how you see the world. You don't need Big Brother. The mind is Big Brother. Orwell thought you needed a totalitarian state to create doublethink. But you don't. You just need a species that runs on stories. The mythos mind does doublethink automatically. It's not a bug that gets installed by a dictator. It's the default setting. It's how the software shipped. The prison doesn't need guards because the prisoners guard themselves. The stories don't need enforcement because the minds enforce them on their own. And that means 1984 isn't a warning about a possible future. It's a description of how human consciousness has always worked. Orwell was writing about what he thought could happen, but it was already happening. It's been happening for thousands of years. He just noticed it getting more efficient with technology. But the scariest part of all this is that the people running the con might not even know they're running it. They might genuinely believe their own story, which means it's not a manipulator fooling the manipulated. It's the same broken software on both sides. The con man and the conned are trapped in the same operating system. Neither can see it. And that's worse than 1984. In 1984, there's a Big Brother to overthrow. There's a villain, a target. You can imagine a revolution, but in reality, there's nobody behind the curtain. The prison runs itself. The inmates are the guards. The stories write themselves, and the minds accept them, and nobody ever checks the math because the software wasn't built to check the math. Every person in those Epstein files, the ones who went, none of them were forced. Nobody held a gun to their head. No thought police knocked on their door. They walked into that world voluntarily because the stories in their own minds told them to. The call was coming from inside the house. And that's why we need to become autonomous humans, logos thinkers. Because when you can think for yourself, and I mean really think, not just repeat what someone told you, none of this works on you anymore. The stories don't land. The suggestions don't stick. The big table doesn't tempt you because you built your own table, and that terrifies them. Because think about it like this. If you were as small as they say you are, they wouldn't need 3.5 million pages of cover-ups to keep you in line. They wouldn't need the PR campaigns and the propaganda and the "it's not a crime to party" press conferences. All of that machinery exists because they know what happens the moment you stop running on stories and start thinking with reason. Their game ends. I asked you a question at the beginning of this video. If Epstein invited you to dinner before you knew anything, would you have been able to say no? Now you know what it takes to say no. You've seen the difference between the people who went and one of the people who didn't. Taleb didn't have better morals. He had better thinking. He checked the math. He didn't need approval. He didn't need the table. He was autonomous, and that's what made him immune. Orwell thought the prison needed a warden. It doesn't. The prison is the mind itself. The mythos mind creates its own big brother, its own doublethink, its own thought police, all without anyone building a thing. It's been running since before Orwell was born, since before anyone wrote it down. But you can't overthrow a prison that's inside your own mind. There's no revolution. There's no dictator to topple. There's no system to tear down. There's only an upgrade. You either upgrade the operating system from mythos to logos, from stories to reason, or you stay stuck in 1984 forever, and you won't even know it. Because the one thing the mythos mind can never do is recognize that it's the mythos mind. That's not some gift you're born with. That's a skill. That's logos. And now that you've seen how the game works, the stories, the doublethink, the way an entire species can hold two contradictory beliefs and never flinch, you have something most people don't. You've seen the prison from outside. Don't walk back in. And hey, they're still laughing at you. But laughter is the sound scared people make when they realize someone is waking up.